Chapter 1: The Legend of the Black Knight. In the quiet town of Ravenswood, nestled in the shadow of an ancient forest, a dark legend lingered. For generations, the townsfolk whispered of the Black Knight, a cursed warrior who roamed the outskirts of the town, bringing misfortune and terror to anyone who crossed his path. It was said that his armor was as dark as midnight, his eyes glowed with an eerie, otherworldly light, and his presence was heralded by a bone-chilling cold. Chapter 2: The Arrival. One autumn, a young historian named Jonathan Gray arrived in Ravenswood, drawn by the tales of the Black Knight. With a passion for uncovering the truth behind local legends, Jonathan was determined to separate fact from fiction. He rented a room at the local inn and began his research, delving into old records and interviewing the townspeople. The innkeeper, Mrs. Haversham, was a wealth of knowledge. She told Jonathan about the knight's origins, a tale of love, betrayal, and dark magic. According to the legend, the knight had once been a nobleman named Sir Cedric, who had fallen in love with a beautiful witch named Alara. When their forbidden love was discovered, Alara was accused of sorcery and executed. In his grief, Sir Cedric sought revenge, striking a deal with dark forces to bring her back. The ritual went horribly wrong, cursing Cedric to wander as the Black Knight for all eternity. Chapter 3: The First Encounter. One evening, Jonathan ventured into the forest to find the ruins of Sir Cedric's castle. The sun was setting, casting long shadows across the path. The forest was eerily silent, the only sound being the crunch of leaves beneath his feet. As he approached the ruins, a cold wind swept through the trees, and he felt an overwhelming sense of dread. Suddenly, he saw him, the Black Knight. Standing among the ruins, the knight's dark armor glinted in the fading light. Jonathan's breath caught in his throat as the knight turned to face him, eyes glowing with an unnatural light. The knight raised his sword, and Jonathan fled, his heart pounding in his chest. Chapter 4: The Investigation. Back at the inn, Jonathan recounted his encounter to Mrs. Haversham and the other townspeople. Most were skeptical, but a few believed him, their faces pale with fear. Determined to uncover the truth, Jonathan continued his investigation, seeking out old manuscripts and speaking with those who had claimed to see the knight. He discovered that the Black Knight appeared every 50 years, coinciding with the execution of Alara. Each time, his presence brought a wave of misfortune, failed crops, mysterious illnesses, and unexplained deaths. The townspeople believed that the knight's curse was tied to the land, and that he could not be laid to rest until the ritual that cursed him was reversed. Chapter 5: The Scholar's Discovery. Jonathan's research led him to an ancient tome, hidden away in the town's library. The book contained a detailed account of Sir Cedric's life and the ritual he performed. It also described a counter-ritual, a way to break the curse and free the Black Knight's soul. The ritual required rare ingredients and a blood sacrifice from a direct descendant of Alara. Chapter 6: The Descendant. Jonathan shared his findings with Mrs. Haversham, who revealed a startling secret: she was a direct descendant of Alara. Her family had kept the secret for generations, fearing the curse and the knight's wrath. Despite her fear, Mrs. Haversham agreed to help Jonathan, determined to end the curse once and for all. Chapter 7: Gathering the Ingredients. The counter-ritual required 3 rare ingredients: the heart of a black rose, the tears of a white stag, and a shard of cursed obsidian. Jonathan and Mrs. Haversham set out to gather these items, enlisting the help of the bravest townspeople. First, they ventured into the depths of the forest to find the black rose. It grew in a hidden grove, guarded by ancient magic. They managed to retrieve the heart of the rose, but not without encountering ghostly apparitions that tried to stop them. Next, they sought the white stag, a mystical creature that roamed the forest. With the help of a local hunter named Edgar, they tracked the stag and collected its tears, which glowed with a soft, silvery light. Finally, they journeyed to the mountains to find the cursed obsidian. The shard was hidden in a cave, protected by dark forces. They battled through shadowy figures and treacherous terrain, emerging victorious with the shard in hand. Chapter 8: The Ritual. With the ingredients gathered, Jonathan and Mrs. Haversham prepared for the counter-ritual. They chose the night of the full moon, when the knight's power was at its peak. The townspeople gathered at the ruins of Sir Cedric's castle, their faces filled with hope and fear. Mrs. Haversham stood in the center of the circle, the ingredients placed around her. Jonathan began the incantations, his voice steady and clear. As the ritual progressed, the air grew thick with tension, and the ground trembled beneath their feet. The Black Knight appeared, drawn by the power of the ritual. He raised his sword, ready to strike, but Mrs. Haversham held her ground. She recited the final words of the incantation, and the ingredients burst into light. Chapter 9: The Sacrifice. The light enveloped Mrs. Haversham, lifting her into the air. She cried out in pain as the curse was drawn from the land and into her body. The Black Knight let out a deafening scream, his form dissolving into shadow. With one final, desperate act, Mrs. Haversham plunged the shard of obsidian into her heart, breaking the curse and freeing the knight's soul. Chapter 10: The Aftermath. The light faded, and the townspeople rushed to Mrs. Haversham's side. She lay still, her face peaceful in death. The Black Knight was gone, his curse lifted, and the land began to heal. The forest grew lush and green, the crops flourished, and the town of Ravenswood prospered once more. Chapter 11: The Legacy. Jonathan stayed in Ravenswood, documenting the events and ensuring that the story of the Black Knight and Mrs. Haversham's sacrifice was never forgotten. The town honored her memory, erecting a statue in the town square and celebrating her bravery each year. Chapter 12: A New Dawn. Years passed, and Ravenswood grew into a thriving community. The legend of the Black Knight became a cautionary tale, a reminder of the dangers of dark magic and the power of love and sacrifice. Jonathan continued his work as a historian, uncovering other forgotten legends and sharing the stories of those who came before. And though the Black Knight's curse had been lifted, the memory of his dark presence remained, a haunting reminder of the past and a testament to the enduring power of the human spirit. Chapter 13: Unsettled Spirits. Years after the Black Knight's curse was lifted, Ravenswood thrived. Yet, shadows of the past continued to haunt the town in unexpected ways. Some townspeople reported strange dreams and eerie whispers that echoed through the night. Jonathan, now an established historian, couldn't ignore these unsettling accounts. He decided to investigate further, believing that the Black Knight's story wasn't entirely over. Chapter 14: The Haunted Manor. One particularly persistent rumor revolved around an old manor on the outskirts of Ravenswood. Abandoned and decrepit, the manor had once belonged to a family closely tied to Sir Cedric. It was said that the spirits of Cedric's kin still wander the halls, their souls unrest by the tragedy that had befallen them. Jonathan, driven by curiosity and duty, decided to spend a night in the manor to uncover the truth. Chapter 15: The Night Vigil. Armed with his notebook, camera, and a lantern, Jonathan entered the manor as the sun set. The air inside was cold and still, the floors creaking under his weight. As he explored the dark, dusty rooms, he could almost hear the faint echoes of laughter and conversation from a time long past. Hours passed without incident until midnight approached. Chapter 16: The Apparition. Just as Jonathan was beginning to doubt the rumors, he saw it, a faint, glowing figure at the end of the hall. It was a woman in a flowing gown, her face pale and sorrowful. She glided toward him, her eyes locked with his. Jonathan felt a chill run down his spine but stood his ground. The woman spoke in a whisper, her voice filled with longing and pain. She revealed herself to be Alara, the witch whose tragic love with Sir Cedric had started it all. Though her lover's curse was broken, her spirit and those of Cedric's kin remained trapped in the manor, bound by unfinished business. Chapter 17: Unfinished Business. Alara explained that the curse had fractured their souls, leaving them unable to move on. She needed Jonathan's help to perform one final ritual, one that would reunite the spirits and grant them peace. Jonathan agreed, feeling a deep sense of responsibility for these restless souls. Chapter 18: The Ritual of Reconciliation. The ritual required the remains of Sir Cedric's family, buried in the manor's overgrown garden, and a sacred relic hidden in the forest, a locket that held a piece of Alara's essence. Jonathan spent days preparing, digging up the graves and finding the locket with the help of the townspeople, who had come to trust and respect him. Chapter 19: The Gathering Storm. On the night of the ritual, a storm brewed over Ravenswood. The townspeople gathered around the manor, their faces tense with anticipation. Jonathan, standing in the center of the garden, began the incantation Alara had taught him. As he chanted, the wind howled, and the ground trembled. Chapter 20: The Reunion. The spirits of Cedric's family appeared, their forms shimmering in the storm's light. Alara materialized beside them, her face hopeful. Jonathan continued the ritual, the sacred relic glowing in his hand. As the final words left his lips, a blinding light enveloped the garden, and the spirits began to merge, their forms intertwining in a dance of light and shadow. Chapter 21: The Final Farewell. As the light faded, Alara and the spirits of Cedric's family stood before Jonathan, their faces serene. They thanked him for his bravery and dedication, their voices filled with gratitude. With a final, tearful farewell, they vanished into the night, leaving Jonathan standing alone in the now silent garden. Chapter 22: A Town Transformed. With the spirits finally at rest, the lingering darkness over Ravenswood lifted completely. The town flourished like never before, its people united by the shared experience of confronting and overcoming their darkest fears. The manor was restored and turned into a museum, preserving the town's history and the tale of the Black Knight and his beloved Alara. Chapter 23: Jonathan's Legacy. Jonathan continued his work, documenting the final chapter of the Black Knight's story. His writings became famous, not just for their historical value, but for the lessons they imparted about love, sacrifice, and the human spirit. He remained a beloved figure in Ravenswood, a symbol of courage and perseverance. Years later, as Jonathan lay on his deathbed, he felt a deep sense of fulfillment. He had dedicated his life to uncovering the past and giving voice to those who had been forgotten. As he closed his eyes for the final time, he saw Alara and Cedric, their faces smiling and their hands outstretched. They welcomed him into the light, and together, they walked into eternity, their souls finally at peace.
Don't forget to subscribe.